Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker along with my co-host, Jen Schwanke, welcoming you to a Q&A before we jump into today's conversation, which is going to be an episode where Jen interviews Ross Romano. Jen, I can't wait for listeners to hear that conversation. But the question of the week is supported by Summer Pop's math workbooks. Principals, when students practice math over the summer, math scores go up. So what's your summer plan for math this year? A great way to start is by ordering free summer workbook samples at summerpopsworkbooks.com. Reach out today to my friend Pete and you won't be disappointed. Jen Schwanke, here's our question. How do you, and these came from a survey I sent out, how do you effectively manage constant student-related issues while staying focused on broader school goals? I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I feel like we get a version of this question quite frequently, don't we? Because this is the work of it. This is the balance that every principal who has a pulse is dealing with. I think a lot about it, and I think that what this question is seeking is some sort of an elimination of or temporary storage, if you will, of those constant student related issues. And that's just never going to happen. They are always going to be there. It reminds me when my dad actually told me when I was a beginning principal, you're always looking for a time when there aren't any problems and you're really upset that they keep popping up. And it's true, they're never going to go away. So I think the key is to fold it in together, fold those constant student issues into your broader school goals and identify trends and patterns that might mean you have to adjust your bigger school goals. So I think you know what I'm saying, Will. Why don't you take a crack at it too?
I'm sure this has been said a lot in other settings, but this is the analogy that's popping in my brain. You probably saw this when I've seen this done at conferences or maybe when I was getting my master's degree where someone takes a big jar and they have rocks and they have
Yep.
pebbles and they have sand and they have water and they basically ask you, how are you going to fill this up effectively? And you can't do it unless you start with the big rocks first. Then you pour in the sand, then you can pour in the water. But if you try it the other way around, it's just an absolute muddy mess. And I feel the same way about this, applying solutions to this question, which is if you don't step into every single day with your big rocks already set, then, which in those big rocks do include the goals, the intentions, the relationships, the time you're spending, and the things that you know are going to move the needle for your school, then when those student related issues, those behavior related issues, those challenges come into the picture, if you don't already have those big rocks set, then all you're doing is messing with the urgent that may also be important, but for some reason, it's really hard to get back to the important goals and focuses unless those are set in advance. So you and I have talked about this in so many settings, Jen, which is that let me see your calendar and I can look at it and see if your calendar reflects the goals and the focuses and the time that matches what you said are the most important values of your school for this year. Then when those other things pop up, you still manage them and you have to be that person who responds to those needs, but you don't allow it to become the thing that consumes you after that situation is over, which is hard to do. It's hard to switch that focus back, but unless you do, you never get back to the things that you feel like are making the most difference. Does that make sense?
Right. And it's keeping in mind that students, kids, children, young people, they are what they are, which is human beings who make mistakes, who don't follow a script, who wriggle and shake and shout and act out and cause all kinds of problems with a plan, right? You have to almost expect that and embrace it and use it as a way to decide what those big rocks are.
Well, and that's why I think systems are so important too. We've talked about this before to make sure that you've got the right people in place, the right systems in place, the right processes in place, the right protocols in place. So you're not just trying to manage everything yourself, that there's a way that these things are managed when they hop up too, so that you're not the only person that's being pulled every time something happens that needs attention as well. So I know we can talk way more about that and go more in depth, Jen, but I'm going to try to keep our Q&A to 5 minutes. Anything you want to
Okay.
add before we wrap that up?
No, I'm just thinking about my first couple of years as a principal. There was a student, he got sent to my office about every 14 minutes. And every time I was surprised and annoyed and like, again, what I should have done is been like, well, of course, this is a problem I need to solve. And I shouldn't have just dealt with them in isolation. I should have dealt with the bigger problem. And
Oh my gosh. I'm
if
so glad
only
you said that. You just brought back another memory of a friend of mine who's an AP in Washington State. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Nick Davies. And it was probably 2 years ago, this conversation. He's told me that same thing. He was like, I was just recognizing one student in particular that we keep seeing over and over again. And then I stopped one day and said, what have we done different than what we've been doing since the beginning of the year? And he said, right then I called a meeting and pulled everybody in that supported that student so we could come up with some new strategies.
right,
And I was like, well, that's brilliant. So
right,
sometimes just taking a step back from that
exactly.
consistent problem and then asking other people to be included in that solution can be so helpful. Well, Jen Schwanke, thank you for doing that Q&A. I can't wait for folks to hear this conversation you had with Ross Romano. Principal Matters listeners, you know you can stay connected with our resources through my website at williamdparker.com. Jen, how can they stay connected with you and yours?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com or email me at jen@jenschwanke.com.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 431.
Hello, Principal Matters listeners. We're so excited to have you here today for a conversation with Ross Romano. Someone I met, gosh, what's it been, Ross? Probably about 8 years. Although when I reminded you of that, you said, no, it can't be that long. But it has.
No, you were right.
I was right. So I'm excited to have him here to talk about his work. Ross has a very unique job and connects with a lot of school leaders, a lot of deep thinkers about leadership and education. So, Ross, let's just turn it right over to you. Tell our listeners about you and what fills your days lately.
Sure. Yeah, I seem to find a way. To kind of encapsulate it and summarize it, the way I describe the work I do in the consulting space is really working with any product service provider who supports schools and school districts, right? Ed tech companies, publishers, PD, anything in that realm, nonprofits, of course. And it's supporting them along the journey from vision to decision is how I describe it. It's really helping them from the ground up to identify, clarify, and articulate their mission, their vision, what they stand for, what they're trying to accomplish, and then to consistently take the actions, make the decisions, right? Invest in the right areas to make progress toward that, and really having that consistency across the board, whether it's product decisions, marketing, communications, and sales enablement strategy, having alignment, consistency in all of those things, all the areas that over several years of working with, I did the math, like 100 plus companies in the space where I noticed where those gaps often were. And so my goal we'll talk about what the companies are, but in kind of getting into these companies was to be able to go into greater depth with founders and with leaders and solve those pain points that seem to recur over and over in companies big and small.
Great. And your focus is education quite a bit, right? And I first met you after my first book was published with ASCD. You were working for ASCD at the time, and you helped with the marketing of the book. And so I'm assuming that your expertise is not only in education, but in how to get a message out there. And like you said, from vision to implementation. And you do that through a lot of avenues. One of them is your B podcast network. Tell us about that and the connection to your actual podcast called The Authority.
Sure. Yeah. So the V Podcast Network, we have 40 plus shows now, and they're all around education. Many are around K-12 leadership, but we also have corporate learning and development, parenting, other relevant education topics. In addition to The Authority, on which I interview authors and thought leaders, I do one that's around sports coaching. So all those different avenues, I call them subgenres within the education community, all those different roles, right, that people play within education. And we kind of have this shared mission that it's all about creating transformational change in learning environments, formal and informal, whether it's in the schools, on the playing fields, at home. We have a show that is more of teen life coaching, right? So
Mhm.
all these things that impact the growth and development of our young people and the people who support them, really trying to be tactical and dive deep. And we also work with companies. Like I've always talked about like this triangle, like these 3 points of pain points around podcasting. You have your hosts, your creators, and then you have your audience, and then your sponsors, advertisers, companies in the space, right? So those who are in podcasting understand very well the challenges for hosts. It's a lot of work and can be isolating. It's hard to connect with others who are doing similar things, right? Or to figure out how to reach the people you want to reach. For listeners, when they find something they like, can I trust that it's going to stick around? When I find one show that I like, where do I find other shows that are similar? And then for the companies, there's so many podcasts and there's so many good ones. How do I find the ones I should partner with? How do they help me get my message out? So we do things like that. And we also have a show called EdTech Startup Showcase, where we have 6 startups really early stage that are part of that all year, and they get multiple opportunities to talk about what they're doing, their growth, to highlight their customers, their stories, just all those things that are really challenging when you may have a really great product, really smart people, but you don't yet have a ton of money to throw into things, where you kind of need somebody who understands that. And that's why we wanted to design that. So that's kind of what it's all about.
Well, and I think it's such a brilliant idea, and it doesn't surprise me at all that you had that brilliant idea. But, I talk to a lot of education leaders who say, "Where do I find a good podcast? Where do I
Right.
even start?" And until I realized what you were doing nowadays, I wouldn't have known how to answer that question. I also talk to a lot of people who say, "I'd like to start a podcast," and they have no idea the amount of work and commitment, and, weeks pass and here comes time for another episode. And so, you also, I think, behind the scenes connect people. You reached out to me
Mhm.
and said, "Hey, talk to Dr. Karen. You
Yeah.
two would have a lot to talk about." So you're connecting people in the education world and the leadership world, which is super fun. So tell me about, some of the guests you've had in your podcast. You've had some incredible guests, and I'm sure you yourself have learned a lot along the way. So are there some big aha moments that you've had that stand out to you, as I ask you that without any time to prep, um, either from particular guests or as an overall perspective that might be helpful to personal principal matters listeners?
Yeah, I think there's a few through lines, right? And I always have to try to disaggregate like the topics, of course, that I'm interested in and I'm intentionally designing conversations around,
Right.
from the things that our guests are organically bringing to it. But as you mentioned, that the show's called The Authority, and that name really comes from the word author, right? And we call it, conversations with people who know what they're talking about.
Right.
But 99% of the time it's built around a particular book that author has written. From time to time you just have an opportunity to talk to somebody really cool, and and you do it a little differently. But we do try to highlight proven ideas to help leaders increase their influence, hire and develop an excellent staff, build a stronger culture, lead meaningful change, right? So it's specifically created with education leaders in mind, although a lot of times we talk about leadership principles that apply to a lot of people. And I have had it really has been a pleasure to have so many different guests from I'll talk about some of them, but some that I'm sure the listeners of this show are very familiar with and have probably been on this show as well. Others who are these Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestseller types that are more from the corporate world. But a few of the common threads that have come out over the 100+ episodes that really relate to these education leaders is, one, that there's a real consistent idea that we are understanding that educators slash schools, right, and families are partners, need to
Mhm.
be on the same team, on the same page, and that it's something we need to keep giving more and more attention to, right? It's a cause of a lot of discord when it's not done right, but it's an opportunity, and we've addressed that from a lot of different angles. And I did a conversation with Tom Gusky about engaging parents and families in grading reforms, right? So that's really specific, important conversations to have around getting over the resistance to that change and also trying to develop the systems that we really do want. I had Ari Gerzon Kessler about family and school together teams and really having, developing more long-term initiatives around that engagement. Kristen Vogel Campbell talked about partnering with culturally and linguistically diverse families, right? And understanding who are those underrepresented families that have the same concerns, same ideas, same things that they want to be contributing to that dialogue, but they might be getting left out for a variety of reasons because they're not comfortable with the language, or they're not sure what they're supposed to do or that they're invited to do. And I mean, it's come up a lot. We also have Patrice Bain talking about a parent's guide to powerful teaching, specifically about how do we have parents really understand how we're teaching, what our strategies are, what learning science is, right? So it's all the things that happen in schools. It's not just what are our clubs and activities or what is on my child's progress report, right? But it's everything from those foundational principles of teaching and learning up to how we do grading and how should we do grading. So that's kind of that one. We
And I'm
also,
going to
yeah.
pause you
Mhm.
because and don't forget your other couple. But I think we should park here for a moment because I hear principals over and over and over saying, I know I need to engage with my families
Mhm.
and I try really hard. And then, I'm making this up, but then a kid gets in a fight and I try and figure it out, do the discipline, and then everybody's mad at me. The teacher's mad at me,
Right.
the kid's mad at me, the parents mad at me, and I have failed at engagement.
Mhm.
And I try to tell them, no, 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 you can't take one incident and make that your own self evaluation about your work. You can't think that you have failed at engagement because somebody's mad at you. It's bigger than that. It's
Mhm.
about the aura that your school puts out into the world, and it's about how the teachers are engaging. It's much bigger. And so for you to have all these different perspectives and bring them together, first of all, I think is immensely valuable to school leaders. But I also think too, one of my favorite sayings, Ross, is the animals look at each other differently when the well goes dry. Because
Mhm.
so many times when we have people in a room or in a meeting, they're all there to defend their situation
Yeah.
and they want to win, right? They want to get the last sip of water, so to speak. And I think it's important for school leaders to know this isn't a race, it's not a competition, and it certainly shouldn't be a power struggle.
Right.
And that's probably what you're getting at when you talk about this engagement piece and how we really do have to be on the same page because there's only so much water. So thank you for
Right.
letting me
Right.
interrupt and continue with your through lines.
Yeah, and it's consistent, ongoing, and proactive, right? It's that
Right.
if we know that 10 things happen in a school and nine of them are good, but the parent only hears about the one bad thing, like of course they are going to have a little bit of stress when they see the phone number coming in from the school
Hmm.
because, oh well, what's going on, or they have a perception that, well, there's always problems there because I'm not hearing about all these other things or I'm not engaged in it. So it just presents opportunities, and I like to have that variety of conversations because we can talk really specifically about, okay, here's an area and what does it look like, versus just saying, yes, engage your families, right, as a
Exactly.
concept, which everybody would like to do, but when we don't talk specifics, it's hard to implement.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that
Engage your
also,
families. Nobody's going to argue with that, but that's
right.
where the knowledge stops. Right.
And I think that really connects to the kind of one of the other takeaways is about culture, and it's about there was a statistic. This is in one of the books. I had a guest called named Mark Miller, who was formerly the VP of high performance leadership for Chick-fil-A. He was like one of their first 15 corporate hires at the company in the late 70s. And his book culture rules. Went right to the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list. But he had this stat from research that he and his team did: 71% of U.S. leaders in all industries believe culture is their number one most powerful tool to drive performance. But when you ask them for their priority list, enhancing culture is like ninth, right? So they think it's the most important thing, but they're not exactly prioritizing it. And is that because we have other day-to-day things that we think are more urgent, or because we don't really know, like, practically what does it mean to enhance culture? But it comes up again and again, whether it's with really understanding who you want to hire and hiring for cultural fits, right? Or for what leaders can do. There's a book by David Schreiner that he's in the hospital administration field, but the same, it totally applies to schools. Be the best part of their day, right? What are your opportunities to make a positive impact on all of the stakeholders in your building? And it also relates to equity and access issues, right? Creating a culture around the mission and purpose of creating equity, diversity, social justice, all these things that the leader needs to be consistent in, that needs to have all of the staff and faculty in the building understand not only what we stand for as an organization, but that they'll be supported in leaning into that, right? That they don't feel like they're isolated or it's on themselves. And that's like, but the strong culture starts with being a high priority,
Right.
And that's where the disconnect often is.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but what does that actually look like? Look no further than IXL, the ultimate online learning and teaching platform for K-12. IXL gives you meaningful insights that drive real progress, and research can prove it. Studies in nearly all 50 states show that schools that use IXL outperform other schools on state tests. Educators who use IXL love that they can easily see how their school is performing in real time to make better instructional decisions. And IXL doesn't stop at just data. IXL also brings an entire ecosystem of resources for your teachers with a complete curriculum, personalized learning plans, and so much more. It's no wonder that IXL is used in 95 of the top 100 school districts. Ready to join them? Visit ixl.com/PM to get started. Hi, friends. Did you know that Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, has been downloaded over 1.5 million times? We are so proud to share conversations, interviews, and resources to support leaders like you who are serving school communities worldwide. And I'd like to invite you to explore our books, our professional development offerings, our Grow Academies, our masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations, because we're here to help you and your teams build schools that you're proud to call home. So here's my question. How are you planning to keep growing in the semester ahead? We're booking events right now for the next 2 years, and we would love to serve you in person or virtually. So visit williamdparker.com and click services, or email me at will@williamdparker.com to connect. I would love to hear from you. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's show.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
And I hear so many principals. I just worked with a principal group a couple weekends ago, and they were killing themselves to improve culture. Like you said, they know it's important, but they were doing all the wrong things. They're like, I spend my money, my own money, and I decorate the lounge, and I bring in donuts, and I make a orange you're glad you work here day, and I give everybody orange candy. And they said, nobody thanks us. And I said, because they don't need that. It's bigger than that. What they need is for you to be the best part of someone's day. They need you to be the most positive voice in the room, or the most calm voice in the room, whatever the situation warrants. And it's not at all about giving people what what's easy or what they think they want. It's about hiring and keeping an eye on, are we taking care of people? Do they feel valued? Do they understand the why behind decisions? It's not just about bringing donuts on Fridays. that helps, but it's not a culture mover at all.
And controlling what you can control. Like there's a
Exactly.
lot of things that, of course, are out of your hand, when it
Right.
comes to either the things that you may ideally want to do around recruitment and retention, or any other kind of challenges that school leaders are facing. But focusing on that, or either as a stressor, or as an excuse for not doing what you can control, and saying, look, this is the role I play, and this is what is in my hands. That presents the opportunities to make a difference. And that's one of the things, it ties into the biggest challenges of school leaders is that retention improvement piece. And I had many, many conversations over the past couple of years with every role from district HR directors to teachers and principals and consultants and all the people around the industry about why do teachers choose to leave either their school or the profession. And it boiled down to two main reasons. There's a lot of other things, but the two main reasons: one, poor leadership. That's consistent across industries, right? And two, I no longer feel like I can make a difference here. Like, I don't feel like I have the resources or support to really help students be successful. That's why I got into this profession. So if I'm not making an impact, there's no other reason, that's when things about, well, it's not highly compensated or other things like that come into play, but only once I feel like, well, it's, sure, I guess if you paid me enough money, I could live with feeling like I'm not making a difference, maybe, right? But since I'm not, I might as well go do something else. But that leadership piece that's where the opportunities are to say, okay, I'm going to take ownership of this, and I'm going to be the reason that we keep great educators here versus why we lose them. And again, like, you can't control everybody's decision. People will make the decisions they make, but viewing it at least as, I do have some influence over this, and there are things I can do, and I'm not going to be inhibited by my perception of the things that I can't control. Like, it's a starting point. And I did want to touch on there is one other like key theme, it's relevant because it's about urgency.
Right.
And it's about the urgency over the next year in particular to do a lot of the things that we can do. And that's come up from different angles as well. I had an episode with Michael Fullen about, he had his book, The Principal 2.0, which was, revisiting the original one from less than a decade ago. He said 95% of the book is different. Like, that's how much the role of the principal has changed in that time because of the pandemic and a variety of other shifts about what principals need to focus on. And we're at the point now where it's kind of make or break. Similar ideas like Anthony Muhammad had about like the way forward, like this is the window of innovation, and you have a certain period where there's openness to innovation, right? Especially after a crisis or after a challenging situation, but that closes fast. And what are the things we can do now that we could never get buy-in for before? And that also relates to like AI, right? Embracing AI literacy, the potential that those tools may have to help us close persistent equity gaps, access gaps, right? Or to exacerbate them and to say, okay, like, what does that mean? That means over the next year, educators really need to become literate in what the technologies are. We need to stop being fearful of cheating and that. Like, okay, let's have some mindfulness around academic integrity, sure, but let's understand that, like, and this is my words, that the biggest cheating we can do with these tools is cheat kids out of learning how to use them and cheat them out of developing future ready skills, because kids who have a certain amount of privilege, whatever that, they're going to get access. They'll get them at home, they'll learn how to use it, they'll develop the skill. kids who may not have as much access or as much guidance in learning how to make use of different tools outside of the school building, they're going to be left behind if we're operating from a place of fear instead of from a place of opportunity and saying, look, if they become really good at using and they become really knowledgeable and they can do meaningful things and they can create the work, the workforce of the future, instead of being, on the side of, oh, what jobs is this going to take away? It's, well, I'm going to make whatever the jobs are going to be.
Well, and what I heard you do there, Ross, is really important because you basically said we can't be innovative for innovative just for the sake of being innovative, because that's throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks. We have to really, and I heard you do this, find something that needs to be done, take advantage of an opportunity to be innovative, and don't let fear stop you. I see so much of that. And a lot of it isn't necessarily the school leaders, it's a board of education or it's parents who say, I mean, I still have parents say to me, why can't we just go back to worksheets? That works for me. And what that really is, it's a sense of fear. I don't know what this new world is with AI. I don't even know what that means. My kid is talking about it. My teacher is saying, please don't cheat using AI.
Yeah.
What? And if you think about how we are sometimes so limited, not only by our own fears, but by the fears of the people that look to us to lead. And I think about, how easy it is to borrow fear from other people. If someone around me is freaked out, then all of a sudden I'm freaked out. And so that's the challenge of leadership right now, particularly in the area of innovation, because we need to be innovative, we need to be confident, we need to accept there's going to be missteps. But as you said, what a theft of our children's future if we don't say, hey,
No.
we have to figure this out. That's literally what we're here to do, is help them be ready for what's next.
Yeah. And it goes back to that earlier point, right, about the culture that the leader is creating to be open and encouraging of exploring this, so that individual teachers in the classrooms know that they have some freedom to test these things, to learn about them, that, if they feel like, oh, if they find out that I'm having students use this tool, I'm not going to be supported in that, or they're going to think that I'm just helping students cheat, then they're not going to explore it. And that's not, if a student can automatically like just replicate an assignment by plugging it into Chat GPT or something, then it's just not a good assignment,
Right.
for the skills that they really are going to need to have in the future. And so yes, it puts a challenge and a burden on schools to rethink a lot of the work that we're doing. And that, I'm not saying that's easy, but if it's that easy to just do the assignment without having to do it yourself, then in 5 years, everybody's going to do it that way. So it no longer becomes a marketable skill.
Right. Right. And, I know you do some thinking and podcasting in the area of athletics and so on, sports. My husband is an athletic director, and he would tell you anytime there's a new coach hired, there's a rocky period, because people look back and think, well, it was so much better before. And they have hope for the future, but they just need to kind of test the waters. And so he will often say, you got it, you just give them a chance. And I think that that analogy applies to any sort of innovation. AI is a great example. We can't say, ooh, this feels really uncomfortable. It's different from what we know. Let's shut it down. Let's not do it. I actually had a parent say that to me. Can we just not do AI? And I said, you've been doing it for years and you don't even know it. Every time you Google something, you're doing, I'm air quoting here, AI. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And let's give it a chance to transform our world. Because again, we can be mad, and there are a lot of questionable parts of the tech industry right now. There really are. But what do we? It'd be like trying to plug a waterfall with a tiny little push of the finger. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that reminds me of it's an episode that hasn't published yet, but I did an episode of my sports coaching show, where I interviewed high school football coach who was taking over a new
Mm-hmm.
job, and the athletic director said, "You're probably not going to win any games this year, and I'm not sure about next year." And it wasn't like doubting him or questioning him, but it was his way of saying, like, this is the state of the program. This is where we are. These are the expectations. So build the program that you want to build. Like, if you don't have any wins this year, you're not going to lose your job. We're not in a position where we're going to do a lot of winning right away. Go about it, build what you think you need to build so that we can build toward long-term success. And so but that's a gift, right? And that's not
Right.
everybody is going to do that. A lot of people are going to say, well, we didn't do so great before, but hopefully you can make us better. And you're thinking, okay, how do I take some shortcuts to success? And what's the difference between one win this year or two or three, and versus like what gets us to 10 wins in 3 years kind of thing. And the same thing exists with all of this. Is we're not going to have all the answers right away. There's still a lot of things we don't know about what these tools will be able to do, what some of the jobs will look like, jobs that are going to change and all of that. But if we don't engage with it and explore and figure out a little trial and error, then we will never know.
Exactly. Exactly. And you just threw me a softball with the next question. And we're running a little bit out of time, but I want to springboard into this question. You are a performance coach, and in that work, well, let me say this. You're a performance coach, and you also know how stressful it is to be a school leader, and that there's a lot going on, a lot of challenges. And so when you're working with clients, how do you help them stay in a good headspace? Stay healthy, stay happy, stay effective. And happy is a very weighted word. So I'm not talking about, dancing down the streets and saying I love my life, but how can we help people let go of some of the chronic stress they carry and stay in a good headspace? Is there anything you've seen
Mhm.
that we can leave with our listeners today?
Yeah. And there's so many challenges. We talked about the retention recruitment, of course, increasing student achievement, right? Relationships with parents, family, community, and your own, and all of this while you have your own burnout, your own
Right.
isolation, right? And saying, okay, I'm trying to deal with teacher burnout, but I'm not feeling, like I have a lot of energy left. So there's a few things that are like the tactical pieces. It's the controlling what you can piece. It's getting coaching, seeking mentorship, reverse mentorship, having younger generations
Hmm.
teach you things that you might not know, even if you've been in the job a long time, plugging into your networks, those things that eliminate some of that isolation, but also give you insights into yourself, into your goals, proactive communication. But there's also some pieces around that well-being. There's a concept in positive intelligence coaching is one of the forms of coaching that I do, and it's your saboteurs and your sage. And your saboteurs is basically your limiting beliefs, right? It's the things, it's recognizing that they're thought patterns that are making you feel stressed, anxious, feel like you can't achieve something, identifying the source of where they're coming from so that you can call it out and say, like, that's not me, or that's not the reality, it's just the thought that I'm having.
Yep.
And the more you can develop that, then you have less and less of that reaction, that physiological reaction to it over time, and you form a different perspective. Taking time for yourself, like understanding that you can't fill somebody else's cup if yours is empty, right? And you can't lead if you have no energy, and then that rubs off. That happens in the classroom level, right, where we spend so much time wondering about student engagement. How do we engage students? And well, if their teacher's not engaged because they're burned out, then of course students aren't going to be engaged. And then it goes up to the school leadership. If you're, it rubs off, right? And so you have to take the time to recharge yourself and to understand that it's a choice. You can choose calm over chaos, right? Like, and you have to have that owner mentality and say, look, it's all about, you can create what you want, but you have to know what you want. So you have to
Right.
take the time to really understand that, work toward it, And as Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. Like, understand that even in the culture where it feels antagonistic, there's a lot of people out there who want you to succeed. Look for those people,
Right.
lean on them, recruit them, whether they're parents, other community members, people within your building, peers, that you can just talk to about what you're working on. That there's many more people who understand the importance of your job and want you to do well than those who don't. Look for those people,
Right.
and gain strength from them.
And I want to just tell you, my greatest weakness as a leader. And as you spoke, I kept thinking, oh, I feel seen. My self-sabotage is my thought patterns. As you said, I will literally be sitting in really tricky meetings and I'll think, I don't wanna, because it's my 7-year-old coming out, right? Like, this is hard. I don't want to. This is going to be a big challenge. And then I fall into that thought pattern. And like you said, it's a physiological reaction where I think, oh, I don't even want to do this work. What am I thinking? What have I done with my life? But then I have a peer, my boss, my superintendent, and he's like, no, we get to do this. It's going to be fun. And I'll say, oh, no, it's not. And he will, he'll help me get out of that thought pattern. And then I do the same for him when he's spiraling. So I think it's true that you need that person or that network to get you out of your own head when you think, I just don't wanna. So, Ross, this has been so insightful and it's going to be so helpful to our principal listeners. Tell our listeners where they can find you. There's lots of places. So tell them where they can find your work and get a hold of you if they would like some performance coaching themselves.
Sure. Yeah. For listeners here, the easiest place, probably LinkedIn. You can go to LinkedIn, just search for Ross Romano, and I'm sure you'll find me. We probably have some common connections, or you can go through my website, septemberstrat.com, or just email me directly at ross@septemberstrat.com. And I'll give, Jen, I'll give you the links to the podcast and things that you can put in the show notes to make it easy for people. I won't list them all off here. But yeah, please don't hesitate to connect on LinkedIn or email me, and we certainly can talk.
And definitely check out the B Podcast Network. There's just a kind of a scrolling banner of podcasts that you can check out. That's just really inspiring because, again, when I look at it, I think, oh, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people out there that are thinking and talking about this. So thank you so much for your time today, Ross. It was so much fun and great to connect again with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.